uh, and then I wrote just a causation letter saying the reason she can't do these things is because of the fracture, not commenting on the surgery. And it didn't take me a lot of time, so I charged him, I don't know, $1,700. Nothing, right, in the grand scheme of things. And he was able to leverage that into another $350,000 in settlement value.
Hello and welcome to the Attorney Post, where we give you the inside scoop with top attorneys in their field. And now, here's our host, Justin West.
All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with lawyers at the top of their game to help you rather navigate the ins and outs of the various legal fields and jurisdictions. Because, as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. However, we're going to throw you a softball, or rather a curveball today. I am joined by Dr. David Grundy. David is a consulting physician, amongst other things. And we're going to dive into his work as an expert witness, as a consulting physician, and really kind of dig into what he does, because what he does is kind of the magic sauce. It's the secret ingredient for a lot of personal injury cases. We obviously interview a lot of personal injury attorneys on this podcast, so it's going to be a little bit different from what we're used to, but I think it still fits very comfortably under the aegis of the Attorney Post. Doctor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Justin. Thanks for having me on here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, before we begin, let's jump over
The
and take a
recording
look
has
at...
stopped.
Okay, never mind. My assistant's recording anyway. It doesn't matter. We had a brief Zoom hiccup, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about that. I will just go ahead and get rid of that. And we may cut this out in post, or you may just see me sit here and talk for about 3 seconds awkwardly. There we go. So this is Dr. David Grundy of Grundy MD Consulting. You can visit his website at grundymdconsulting.com. As always, we will have a link in the description down below. He does have a phone number as well. It is tiny and at the bottom, and I can't read it. It is 650-649-5352. There's a second one there as well. You can also fill out the form and everything else. And again, he is a physician with multiple decades of experience and trade in what he does, and he helps particularly injury attorneys to help their clients get the best results out of their cases, figuring out what's going wrong, and helping them put together the strongest possible case to get the best possible results for their clients. I am fascinated to dig more into this, so we are going to get onto that here in just a minute. Before we do that, we are going to read from our first sponsor. The first sponsor today is Andropology. Gentlemen, if you're looking to take charge of your health and feel your best, listen up. Whether it's managing type 2 diabetes, boosting your testosterone levels, or just wanting to increase your overall longevity, Andropology.com has got you covered. They dive deep into natural solutions from superfoods like spirulina and tart cherry extract to targeted fitness routines like high-intensity interval training that can help you reclaim your energy and vitality. At Andropology, it's all about practical, science-backed advice tailored specifically for men who want to improve their health without the fluff. Think of it as your go-to guide for navigating the complexities of men's health, simplified. From diet tips to supplement recommendations, they have everything you need to start making positive changes today. Visit andropology.com today and start living a healthier, more vibrant life. That's andropology.com, where better health begins. All right. So, as I said before, I am joined with Dr. David Grundy. Dr. David Grundy is the founder of Grundy MD Consulting. His name is on the mast. He has over 20 years of experience in clinical emergency medicine, forensic medicine, and peer review. He provides expert medical legal consultation services to attorneys in personal injury, medical malpractice, and workers' compensation cases. Dr. Grundy is known for delivering quick, high-quality, and cost-effective reports, helping attorneys make sense of complex medical issues in their cases. His firm specializes in maximizing case settlement value by providing actionable insights and expert analysis, often resulting in a 10 times to 20 time return on investment. In addition to his consulting work, Dr. Grundy has served as an associate professor of emergency medicine and lectured internationally. He's also worked with Fortune 500 companies in technical analysis and project de-risking, enhancing his wide-ranging expertise. I'm sure I could keep talking a lot more and say a lot more things, but I'd never get to the bottom of it. So I'm just going to ask you, David, what did I miss?
Oh gosh, to hear you talk like that, it sounds like I'm 10 feet tall and bulletproof. Thanks, Justin, for that intro. What did you
Only
miss?
Nerf bullets. Only Nerf bullets.
Oh, no, thank you. So I think that really hits the nail on the head with the business that I've been in for the last 3 years, which, just like Justin said, is medical legal consulting, but maybe with a twist, or perhaps you'd call it a focus, which is different than narrowly focused expert testimony, which I also do in med mal cases, for instance. I'm a board certified ER doctor from Cincinnati originally. Kind of circuitous course after that. I did residency in Cincinnati as well and served as an associate professor there of emergency medicine. And I got a military commission in the United States Army during my residency, and then was deployed multiple times to the Middle East. After which, I actually immigrated to Australasia and kind of did a tour around the globe for the next decade or so, working in New Zealand, where I gained my citizenship, and also Australia, in Iceland, in Southern Africa. So kind of did all that type of thing and came back to the US in 2012 and have been working as a clinical ER doctor for, from then till now. And then over the last 3 years, I've started this business that Justin mentioned, which is the medical legal consulting business, Grundy MD Consulting.
Awesome. So give me your pitch, right? Tell me in a nutshell, if you and I were on an elevator, we got 30 seconds, maybe a minute if you're going to the top. And I said, David, what do you do? What do you do? Give me your pitch. Who do you help? Why do they work with you? Why do people choose to work with you? What are the results? Obviously, I've hit on a few of those, but give me your best.
Absolutely. So I would say that 90% of my clients are personal injury attorneys, and the other 10% med mal. We've also done a little bit of support in criminal cases to law enforcement, but that's been just a very tiny slice. And what the real value proposition here is that instead of being a narrowly focused, professor of orthopedic surgery, an expert witness whose fees tend to be very high. I do that in emergency medicine, but the real product is actually, I think, a bit of a disruptive product in a way. It's uh, consulting where you don't necessarily retain me. You ask a specific medical question, and I help you develop that, a medical theory in a case, perhaps, or delivering key reports. And what we do in Grundy MD Consulting is a little bit of the special sauce is we really focus on client care. So we want to make sure that the attorney client is getting exactly what they need to get them to the next screen without any fluff. So maybe it's just a causation report. Maybe it's a more extensive key report of some other type. And we work for mostly plaintiff side, but we've worked for the defense as well. So we're pretty full spectrum as far as that goes. And over the last couple of years, I've just done hundreds of cases commenting on every realm of medicine, psychiatry, et cetera. Another big piece can be de-risking cases, and we've all seen it. A client, a potential client comes in, and maybe they've been injured, maybe there's breach, but the story's just fishy, maybe, or just strange, right? These are cases where I like to get involved early. And if I can spend a couple hours of my time and just, give you a thumbs up or thumbs down on taking that case. I mean, we had one instance where we saved this firm many tens of thousands of dollars of billable hours because there was just one aspect about it that never would have flown from the point of view of medical plausibility. So I love doing that early de-risking stuff as well. That's kind of, most of what the caseload is at Grundy MD Consulting.
That makes perfect sense. And I know that I've always been fascinated with injury law because I think that they really do feel a need. I mean, they get the short end of the stick. People make fun of them all the time, ambulance chasers and whatnot, but they're there when people are at their lowest, at their worst, when they're injured and they don't know where to turn to. And most people don't have the money to hire an attorney. The average attorney's fees are something like $500 to $1,500 an hour, depending upon where you are. People can't afford that. And I think most of my listeners will know this, but some of them, in case you don't, attorneys work on injury attorneys work on a contingency fee basis, meaning they take on all the expenses, not just billable hours, but hiring experts and doing research and doing data mining and focused. I mean, everything. It can cost tens and tens of thousands of dollars in
Right.
actual money, not just time that was spent not on a different case, right? They can spend, even hundreds of thousands of dollars if the case makes sense, but you don't want to start down that process, get 20,000, 30,000 in the hole and then realize, well, shoot, this was a fake case. What sounded like it was real is not. So it
Yeah,
sounds like that's
this
That's
violates
what
some
you saw.
basic principle of medicine. It would never fly. It's funny. That's sort of the elephant in the room, isn't it? People talk about ER docs like we're the, kind of scumbag meatball surgeons, jack of all trade, master of none. And with PI attorneys too, right? It's kind of in the popular culture, this ambulance chaser thing. But I've found, I've been in this business about 3 years, and as a physician, you may say there's a contentious relationship with attorneys, and so I had a little trepidation going into it. And I found, I mean, nobody's an angel out there, but I found my attorney clients to be just really some of the best human beings that you could possibly ask for. As you say, I mean, you guys take on a lot of risk on the front end, and there's not a single case out of the 100 or 150 or so that I've done that I feel any ethical constraints about it all. I mean, I think these are truly deserving people. The first case that got me into it, I may tell you about it later, but it was this wild thing where my partner and I had to like take this pilgrimage down into the hollers of Kentucky and like interview this Serbian man who'd been horribly injured, but then misread. It was a long thing, and so we just got such a great feeling out of it. Like the old saying, it's nice to do well by doing good, and I feel like I've been able to do that in this business. It's been a real pleasure. And as to this thing about the cost investments that I know you guys, the attorneys, put into these things. I've been so impressed. I mean, some of you guys could come do a shift with me in the ER. Like the medical knowledge you have is spectacular. On the other hand, I feel like leave that to me, right? I mean, what we like to think at Grundy MD Consulting, I'm like a virtual physician right there with you in your office when you need me, right? Okay, maybe that's the Uber model. I don't know. But we develop these warm relationships, but I'm not on retainer unless it's an expert witness case. And I want my clients to feel no constraint in just calling me up and just talking these things through. So that's been kind of our ethos and the vibe we want to have in this business. And I think we've delivered, most of the time, yeah,
Most of the time. I mean, nobody,
most
but
of
you
the
bat enough times,
time.
you don't bat enough. But I mean, you
Hey,
bat
you
pretty
always
well.
learn in business, don't you? Yeah,
There you go,
yeah.
100%. Well, you kind of touched on this already, but you didn't get into the specifics. So I am really curious, A, what got you into medicine? And then B, what got you into this consulting side of what you do? Were you the kid that grew up watching, I don't know, Doogie Howser? Or I'm trying to think what else was on back then. What was the George Clooney one that was, it was ER, right?
ER. Geez, I'm an
Did
old
you,
man. I was in residency and I was in med school when ER was showing. So I won't lie. ER may have been a part of what led me into emergency medicine, but what led me into medicine, no, I didn't plan on doing medicine at all. I honestly thought I would be either a military officer or, as a childhood dream, an inventor.
yeah,
I've always, and
cartoonist.
there you go, right? I mean, I've always liked thinking in an innovative and creative way, and I've actually done some of that. I've worked in industry, kind of helping de-risk technical projects, for Procter and Gamble, that type of thing. But it's a crazy story. I actually applied. Most people apply to dozens of medical schools. I applied to one, University of Cincinnati, and I applied to Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, and UC got back to me first. I was like, well, okay, I guess I'll do this, right? And so I think what led me to it, I had been working in a laboratory, working with some neurosurgeons who were just some of the most like, these are like supermen, like one of the guys had been an F-18 pilot, another had been like an Olympic alternate. And we'd go down to the ER and we'd see these really interesting cases. I'm just a lab rat post-college, right? So we'd go down there, and I just really just loved the environment in the ER and could just see myself doing it. So I went into medicine to do emergency medicine, and then had quite a varied career doing that. Both on the military side, I did eventually get a commission, though not in combat arms.
Thank you, by the way, for your service to the country.
Thanks.
So that got you into medicine. What was the transition that got you into consultative uh, doctoring?
Great question. So, another thing that I had no plan to do until I did the CME course with this man named Dr. Armin Feldman, who he's just such an original, both in business and just his ethos. And he's the guy who kind of like prototyped this whole approach to medical legal consulting. So really focusing on the distinction between a consultative physician and a more narrowly focused expert, Armin Feldman. So I went out to Denver. I had some CME money to spend, continuing medical education. I did this course years ago. It's kind of exciting, thought about launching a business. And then I just didn't do it for years. That might have been like 2017 or something, kind of put it on the back burner until a couple of years ago. I was back in Cincinnati, my hometown, and I've got a good friend who works for Morgan and Morgan. He's a PI attorney, and he just had this case that he wanted me to help him out on. I was like, oh yeah, I can remember all that stuff. So I helped him out, and it was a blast. It was actually that very case I was telling you about with this bizarre like road trip to the middle of Kentucky to interview these people, and I loved it. I just got hooked from there, and then just kept the pressure on, kind of a little bit of marketing and doing more and more cases over time, and I think over the last 3 years I've developed a lot of skill in this realm.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like it's been a very unique but productive experience, and it sounds like you know what you're doing and you do it well. We'll dig into more of that here shortly, but that's really it's funny how life comes at you sometimes, and you don't see where you're going to wind up being, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I couldn't have planned this, but but I'm happy with where I am, and
Isn't
things
that
are good.
right?
So.
And it's not like either you or I are ready to like hang up our spurs, but it is funny as you get a little further on and you look backwards, it kind of all makes sense in retrospect. Like you kind of see how it all linked together. But maybe that's just cognitive bias. I don't know. I know you're a big philosopher, Justin, but it does feel like it makes sense over time.
I'm an armchair philosopher. I don't know that
That's
I'm.
right. You develop these various competencies, you have passion for different things, and I guess the sweet spot is when you can bring those together, right?
No, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. So I was going to ask you this question, and I think I think it's kind of a nonsense question now, but I'll go ahead and ask it and just poke around and see if there's anything there
Sure.
worth feeling out. A lot of my attorney clients or guests, I'll talk to them about the COVID pandemic that we just got through with, and
Sure.
God willing, we're
Sure.
not going to see anything else like it ever again. And for a lot of them, it really changed how they worked. They had to shut down for a little bit, like everyone did.
Right.
They had to start doing, Zooming. All of a sudden, in fact, I rebooted this podcast because all of a sudden attorneys knew how to Zoom, and I'm like, okay, great,
Yeah.
because we used to use Google Hangouts way back in the day, and it was just
Sure.
really awkward technology trying to talk people through. But getting anyone to do Zoom, half the people didn't know what it was. It's weird to think at this point, it's now 2025, to think that there was a time that people didn't know what Zoom was, but that was like 4 or 5 years ago, right? Um, but anyway, so it's kind of neat to see what they all experience, and obviously they all live in different areas. But you weren't doing this particular job. That was 3 years ago, so it wouldn't have really been during the peak of COVID, though you may have had the tail end. But of course, you're working in medicine, so I guess I'll still ask, what was your experience of the pandemic like? What changed?
Yeah.
What was great? What was dumb?
Well, I mean, for one thing, brother, it feels like a million years ago. It's funny. It just, you know what I'm saying? It just feels like so long ago. But right through COVID, the earliest days and just right through the peak and off the shoulder and into the tail of COVID, I worked clinically more than full time. So, I was just crushing it doing clinical shifts in a hospital in South Bay, so Daly City. It's called Seton Medical Center. And I love the patient population there. Pretty humble means, a lot of these patients, Tongans, South, Pacific Islanders, Filipinos, that kind of thing. And yeah, just worked there, just in the trenches the whole time. So I won't lie, it was pretty rough. We lost a couple of our clinicians to the disease. And like it's all evolved, it's not a big deal anymore, but those days were pretty rough. There's a large correctional facility, San Quentin, which is, up here in the Bay Area. And through some sort of state machinations, basically all of the sick inmates from San Quentin were contracted to come to my hospital. So we were just flat out, literally for years. I won't lie, they were dark days, but in many ways, I'm super proud of what I did and what my colleagues did and my staff. It was a real testament to dedication. almost nobody quit or washed out. We had one physician who just didn't want to do it, and she kind of semi-retired, but most people just stuck with it. So yeah,
I mean, if you're in the position in life where you can, like, hey, this is my moment to retire, yeah, I say go for it, I
why
guess.
not, right? But I feel like
I
on
want
the
to start
emergency
next year.
medicine side, we had a real duty to stick with it. I mean, we have airway skills, assessment skills. Like I said at the beginning, we're already the junkyard dogs of medicine. It's like bring them all. We'll take care of it. And I'm proud of what we did. Now, how it changed things. I don't know if your listeners or viewers feel this too, but of course, I've always been doing some marketing, and I started the business sort of at the tail of COVID, and then post COVID has been the most growth. People changed just in general. I feel like I have more odd conversations. Now, I'm not calling you crazy or me. I'm just saying people really changed. Like Zoom is now a thing it wasn't before. I feel like right across the country, blue state, red state, everybody's folkways kind of changed a little bit because of it. And hey, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But I've had more truly bizarre conversations post COVID than before. I don't know, man. Maybe it's to do with COVID or just life in general, but maybe I'm just doing more of everything. I don't know. That's been my big observation about how it changed the business. Stranger stuff, not bad necessarily, just odd, if that makes any sense, right?
As they say, that doesn't kill you only makes you weirder. So I
Makes
guess,
you
yeah, that
weirder.
was.
That's right. It's like Austin, Texas or something.
So you've been in medicine for 2 decades. You've
Plus,
been
yeah,
plus.
yeah.
You're what, 45-ish, right?
Oh, thank you
um,
so
yeah.
much. 54-ish, man. Well, they say army time doesn't count, right? So you can subtract the army time. That keeps you young. No, I've been at it for a while.
Um, I'm sure you've had a number of great wins and successes and things that you would consider setbacks or failures, whether that's in your consulting business or as an ER doctor, et cetera. One of my favorite questions to ask my guests on this channel is what is one of the biggest, what you would perceive as failures that you've experienced, but what did you learn from it and how do you carry that forward to make sure you're helping your patients or your clients or
Yeah.
whatever it happens to be?
Boy, that's a great question. Nobody hearing a doctor talk wants to hear about their failures, but that's a great question, and I'll be open about it. Nothing's perfect, right? And I've had cases that didn't have the outcomes that I wanted clinically. I think that it's funny, classic story, like you're an ER doctor and you're in a bar and somebody says, "Oh, tell me the worst thing you've ever seen," and I'm like, "I'm not going to tell you that. You'd have nightmares for weeks." But we do get a lot of odd stuff. And to me, a failure is if you don't do as well as anyone similarly trained would have done. I mean, this is clinical. This is in the ER, right? Because one of the unique things about it, and I think your attorney listeners, some of them will see this too. You're going into these things with incomplete information, always, every time. I mean, in the ER, these are not my patients that I've known for decades. First time I've seen them. So that someone comes in dying on arrival, and you just have to make sure that you deeply understand and absolutely adhere to the standards. And then if something goes wrong, sometimes that's the way it is. But that's clinically. Now, in the medical legal business, I have a very specific answer. That was all pretty vague, right? In the medical legal business, I had, an early client who I went into this business relationship, did a bunch of cases for him with the understanding that he got that I'm not his retained expert, right? He paid me a retainer or signed any contracts. But in retrospect, I realized I didn't articulate that clearly enough on the front end. And I don't want to go into all the gory details, but it caused a whole lot of misunderstandings and heartaches. So the way I think to mitigate that going forward is just to be very, very clear about the difference in the product. Am I your consulting physician or am I your retained expert? I could be either, right? But I want to make that extremely clear, and that keeps things very straightforward.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. And we're gonna get into in a few minutes here what the difference is, right? Because I'm sure a
Sure.
lot of people want to dive into that and understand the difference and be very clear. So we'll come back to that shortly. But the flip side, I guess, is especially in your career in your consulting, what's one of your biggest successes? I mean, in the ER, I'd like to think your biggest success is every day you save somebody's life. I mean, that it's hard to maybe balance against that. But of course, in PI, if you're not saving somebody's life, you're helping somebody put their life back together, right? But maybe it was a case that you thought was the lawyer thought was a goner, and you showed him something that totally turned everything around. What's one of your biggest successes? What's something you're most proud of, the feather in your proverbial cap?
Oh boy, there have just been just a lot, honestly. I mean, it's really been a good run. And part of that, I think, has been careful case and client selection. But one was I had an attorney brought to me two elderly individuals who were injured in a motor vehicle collision. And both of them had claims afterwards of chronic back pain, a whole bunch of other stuff. Both of them had had these things before. It's like I get the 20,000 pages of records to go, medical records to go through. And even the attorney client was, I don't think there's anything here, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing to it, but just take a look, doc. So he wasn't in a hurry, so I wasn't in a hurry. I kind of backburnered the thing for a while. But when I really dug in, and the man in this couple was neurologically crippled afterwards because of a seizure disorder. And so, what in the heck does that have to do with a moderate speed motor vehicle collision? Well, by looking at the case very carefully, I came to realize that the reason this man had a seizure disorder was from a medical misadventure. Now, this is not a PI case, but here's what had happened. He and the missus are rear-ended. There's enough energy transfer that actually she herniated a couple of discs traumatically. And so, we got a settlement there. That ended up being relatively straightforward. But he was complaining of this terrible back pain. He couldn't walk properly. And ordinarily, a physician would have done an MRI. But he couldn't have an MRI because he had a nerve stimulator implanted already, which was not MRI compatible. Okay. His symptomatology goes on and on. His clinicians are worried. They have to do some tests. So they did this very old school test called a CT myelogram, wherein you introduce a catheter into the thecal space in the spine and you inject contrast. Unfortunately, in this man's case, they either over-injected the contrast or he had a bad reaction. It flowed right up the spine and into his brain, which immediately caused severe seizures. He was intubated in the ICU, and thereafter, he's had weekly seizures ever since. So I was able to establish the causal chain from, the tort, right, the motor vehicle collision to an injury, which required this diagnostic, which had this effect, which led to the seizure disorder, and he was actually fully dependent thereafter. So something that seemed like a nothing burger. The attorney was like, these people, I don't know if you'll find anything. Just have a go. Ended up being a very large and satisfying settlement. So that was like a kind of Sherlock Holmes process. I like to get in there and, we've had a lot of good ones like that, but that was the one that really stands out.
One of the things I've always thought in PI especially, but what you're doing as well is you are kind of Sherlock Holmesing it, however you want
Holmesing
to
it,
ver
yeah, absolutely, Justin. Yeah, I love that aspect of it, and that's one thing that I think maybe we stand apart from the crowd. In fact, we even have other people in this business bring cases to us for kind of like we're the back end to help clarify some of this stuff. Part of what I did in the military involved some investigative practices, that type of thing. And we have done some serious Sherlock Holmes cases. And what that has led to is being able to establish causal chains that really are not obvious to most. We've had cases of like, we demonstrated a man had post-traumatic appendicitis, trauma, which was tortuous in this case, led to acute appendicitis. We've had post-traumatic heart rhythm disturbances like atrial fibrillation. We were able to show that a man developed type 2 diabetes from an injury to his pancreas, from trauma, a whole bunch of stuff like that. So, and that can really help our clients establish future medical costs, and that's where we add a lot of case value, I think, is this very both deep and broad analytical abilities that we bring to the task. That post-traumatic appendicitis, I brought out my biophysics textbooks. I did a model of like a guy falling in space and impacting his abdomen and how much energy transfer. Like, when do you get to use your physics textbooks as a doctor? It's pretty cool, right? And the court found it convincing, obviously, so that ended up well.
Awesome. That almost borders on my next question, but maybe not. Physics in general, right? But what's one of the most absurd things you've encountered, whether in consulting or in medicine? I'm sure you see my father-in-law is a medical doctor who's been practicing for over 40 years. And I remember when he said he was in residency, they brought a guy in laying face down on the stretcher with a giant knife sticking out of his back, and it was like one of his first things he had to do was, safely get this knife out and leave this guy able to move or whatever. Which I don't know if that counts. I would never want to be in that position. What's one of the most absurd things you've encountered, either a case that's been brought to you or in the ER or whatever it happens to be?
Oh, Justin, I can't even start on the absurdities in the ER. There's so many, You're talking about the knife in the head. I remember years ago, I had this very depressed elderly man come in and he had shot himself in the head, right? But they bring him in and he's talking, like what the heck? A transcranial gunshot wound should not be talking to me. Elderly man, and he had like a lot of like redundant skin, like a very fleshy sort of scalp, and he had an entrance wound right behind his ear, and he had an exit wound right at the vertex of his head. And looked at him, my goodness, and it was the firearm could hardly be called a firearm. It was like a 25 caliber, like basically a cap gun, So, well, whatever. It could have penetrated the skull. We CT'd him. There's a fracture on the outer table, but not the inner. Anyway, hadn't penetrated the skull. So apparently he had so much extra flesh in his scalp that the bullet just shot over the top and exited here. So I put a big catheter syringe in the entrance. I numbed everything up and I just pushed fluid through it. And he was sort of like a spouting, kind of like a whale, and just the flush was coming out. And then I sewed this one up at the top and I put a little drain here to send him off to psych. But I would say absurdities in the PI side. These are the ones that like we get asked to de-risk something and it's just bananas. Like, we had a guy in a he had like a facilities problem. It was like a contract issue with a builder, and he alleged that it made him impotent and just all this stuff. But perhaps one of the best was a case of a man who wanted to sue. He fell down steps and he struck his head, and then later developed diabetes, and he had some bleeding in the back of his head. So he said his vision went away entirely, and he had diabetes, and he alleged that was from falling through these rotten steps. So he's suing the landlord, right? Well, let's say that happened on Friday, that he fell down the rotten steps. But on Saturday night, he was out at a bar and some dude brains him with a bottle, right? And he didn't happen to mention that. So in any event, we were actually on the defense side that time. We were just like, no, 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 no. This is from the bottling, not from the steps. And
Yeah.
and the diabetes was because you had diabetes. The vision because you didn't treat your diabetes. All this stuff. So that we get a lot of sort of things that you pretty quickly you can de-risk them. And if I ever write up an opinion, I like to keep it very factual, but I'll just throw a little verbiage in that's a little Mark Twainish, like a little spin on it. So.
Post-traumatic pancreatitis or
Well, that's right. I mean, there are a lot of post-traumatic syndromes that are not immediately obvious. In fact, we had a case where a man was severely injured in a motor vehicle collision, and thereafter developed type 2 diabetes. So we were able to, all the future medical costs of the diabetes. And this is like, they say if you don't know about it, you can't diagnose it. So I feel like I've got pretty deep knowledge base, but also a deep bench. That's part of what we do too, is I have a lot of colleagues from med school and practice that I could just call up and ask these weird questions. And I think that can be really helpful on the PI side, especially to know about some of these more exotic clinical entities, post-traumatic entities, because it adds to your future medical costs, of course.
Gotcha. Um, okay, so let's jump into what you actually do now.
Sure.
I don't want to take up your whole afternoon, obviously. You are sometimes an expert witness. You are sometimes a consulting physician.
Right.
Can you dive deeper into what those roles entail? When would an attorney want you as an expert witness? When would they want you as a consulting physician? Can they have you as both? Does being one preclude the other? And maybe they know the answers to this, but some of my listeners may not. So dive into that a little bit more. And what are the key benefits for attorneys to choose to work with a consulting physician rather than an expert witness?
Really great question, Justin. So, can I illuminate this with a story?
Yeah, please do.
One of
Stories are
my
better. We're
favorite
in the
attorney
podcast
clients.
medium.
He
Stories
since
always go.
retired. There you go. Yeah, I love this guy. Just a fantastic human being. But he calls me up one time with his hair on fire because for years he's been working on this case, which is a pediatric slip and fall. So a girl fell and she fractured the long bone in her leg, her femur. And at that time, which was years gone, she she'd had an intramedullary rod placed, and then she'd had some complications and revisions and so on and so forth. This was a facilities thing, slip and fall. So it was getting closer and closer to the final suspense date. And my attorney client needs a letter of causation, right? Because this poor girl, she can't participate in sports. She can't really run. She wants to dance. She cannot do it. And so, just completely straightforward, my attorney client goes to the professor of pediatric orthopedics. And if it sounds like that's a lot per hour, yes, they do bill a lot per hour. The professor of pediatric orthopedics who operated on her. And he writes the guy a check for 3 grand. And he says, I just need a letter saying the reason she cannot dance and play and do the things she wants is because of the fracture. Nothing about your surgery. It's because she broke her leg. As simple as that, right? So the surgeon cheerfully cashes his check for 3 grand and sends him a letter 10 days later. We're getting really close to the suspense date now. And basically what it says is there's nothing wrong with my surgery. She should be fine. Total poison pill. I mean, pardon my French, he just screwed this guy.
Yeah.
The attorney was asking for causation, a causal chain, X, Y, and Z, put it all together. And the expert didn't comment on that at all. So there was a lack of focus, right? And it was a big waste of money. So he calls me, he's stressing out. I said, I don't know. Let me see what I can do. So I talk to the family, I interview them over Zoom, I go through the medical records, I ask her to walk and such the girl and do that over Zoom. And then I wrote just a causation letter saying the reason she can't do these things is because of the fracture, not commenting on the surgery. And it didn't take me a lot of time, so I charged him, I don't know, $1,700. Nothing, right, in the grand scheme of things. And he was able to leverage that into another $350,000 in settlement value. So the point of this story is I get it. You guys need what you need, not a bunch of other stuff too. I mean, if it's a med mal case and you need a professor of orthopedic surgery, of course, that's who you want on the depot, it's who you want in the courtroom. But let's be honest, 90% of these cases and some practices settle, we all know that's true. So what a consulting physician can do without being retained, I can get those key reports to you that maybe the treating physicians just aren't even answering your emails. They don't want to talk to you, right? Or maybe that professor of pediatric orthopedics is just plain overkill, right? And then, we try to be very accessible and turn these things around quickly. So I think that's kind of the value proposition. That's the consulting side. Now on the expert witness side, that's just, I would function as any other expert, take your retainer and work with you and work through the case with you. So that's the difference, if that makes sense.
What do you think? I don't know how I want to put this. What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions an attorney might have about working with a consulting physician? Is it something that's even on their radar? Are they like, well, there's expert witnesses and that's all I would need? I mean, I would assume anyone worth their salt that's been around a while enough would have a concept of a consulting physician, but do you find that they have misconceptions about who you are, what you do? How do you educate them of the benefits of having a consultative physician?
That's a really great question. So, I don't think that all attorneys do understand this. I think that the thought process had been, uh, I need an expert, and maybe you do. Even on the PI side. I mean, if, for instance, I'm working with a client and they say, I know for a fact I'm going to need you to be deposed, you may need to do, courtroom stuff, then I'm an expert witness, right, in relevant to that injury. And we can actually change tracks too. So let's say somebody comes to me and they say, I need help developing a medical theory in this case, or maybe I need a causation report, and that's a much lower rate that we bill. We get that to you. And then they say later, this has happened multiple times. Well, actually, what we do need is for you to do a depo or whatever. Then, we take discount what you've already paid, and I'm retained and I work with you. But I think that the reason that there's confusion is because it's not that common. Most of the time, attorney clients think in terms of talking to an expert witness, and so they want to retain that individual. And so I think it just takes education, just describing how this is a different value proposition and probably a better one for a lot of things that you're doing, but it has some not weaknesses. It's just not perfect for everything. It's a tool in your toolbox, basically, to have a really great, broadly educated consulting physician kind of on your team. And on the PI side, it's great. Med mal, we do things there too. There have been cases where I'm not the right guy because you need a surgeon, and it's a surgical misadventure, let's say. But the case is so complicated that I end up kind of being the quarterback between like different experts. And, I told you I've kissed the Blarney Stone and all that type of stuff. I'm not that hard to get along with. So I feel like it can be a useful glue sometimes in big, complex cases to, keep all the different experts in line and pulling in the same direction type of thing.
Makes perfect sense. What advice would you give an attorney if they're looking at hiring a consulting physician? I mean, obviously, call me, right? Visit my
Well,
website. But
yeah, other than
what
call me. Right.
when it comes to making the right choice?
That's a good question too. Well, I mean, the first thing that you have to do, like anything else, is just have that 10, 15, 20-minute conversation. Do your diligence and look at the CV, I would say, look at the case, the testimonials, case reports, that type of thing, and personality too. It's like anything else. You want to have a business relationship with people that you work well with. And so I think that's the big thing. Obviously, I'm going to brag about emergency medicine in general. Yes, I'm an ER doctor by trade, but I will say one nice thing about ER docs as consultants is that we are jacks of all trade. And so, uh, if that's what you're looking for, anything to do with traumatic injuries, with post-traumatic sequelae, medical economics, a lot of us, know a fair bit about that too. So I think that if you're looking for a consulting physician, think about an ER doctor who then has gotten into this realm. Not to say there aren't people from all different realms who do a great job, but yeah.
Sounds like the position that you would take in a lot of firms as the consulting physician that they're working with. It really does make sense to have a generalist who understands a little bit about everything, right? Rather than somebody that's blinders on, tunnel vision, only looking at it from the point of view of a surgeon. Like you still may need the surgeon's expertise, obviously, but it sounds like there really is a real value in having more of that jack of all trade concept
Yeah,
in
that's
that.
absolutely right, Justin. I mean, one of my colleagues who I'm just going to put a shameless pitch in for, he's out in Connecticut, I believe. He's in Pennsylvania, named Michael Bummer is his name, but he's a spectacular consulting physician. And he's probably too busy to even take any more work. I don't know. But he's got a couple of really big clients. And, the founder of this one firm was like, he said, Michael, I don't even want to ever take a call with a doctor, and you're not on that call too. He said, it has saved me or made me just hundreds of thousands of dollars, to just in and Mike's great. He does a lot of little Loom videos, and he doesn't even write reports. He just tells you over the phone, and it's very fast turnaround, but it targets your efforts, right? Is the medical theory correct? Is this the right expert? And I think he just adds a lot of value, and that's what we in general can do.
Reminded me of something I'll bring up in post production, but that's funny. So let me ask you one more question, then we'll start winding down because I don't want to take up your whole afternoon. But I guess what is the most rewarding part about what you do? What do you love when you wake up in the morning and you know you're going to work as a consulting physician today? Um, what what makes it all just, glow?
Yeah, man, that's an awesome question, Justin. So, like a lot of your clients, we all have to do some marketing, right? Oh man, I'd rather chew glass than do marketing. It is what it is, right? But I've got to make these calls, and I get myself psyched up, and I got something, a little mantra that I read, and mine is, on the other side of these calls are clients that I can help. And I mean your clients, right? I've been very good thus far about case selection, and it really is a great feeling to help somebody who's been truly harmed, and help rehabilitate them, help make them whole as best as we can. And I don't know. It's justice, right? I mean, I know that sounds like a bit of a cliche, but I like to see that done. I like to be a part of it, and help out, really add value, and help these people who have had very shattered lives in many cases, make them whole if we can. So that's been the real motivator.
Doing good and putting good out into the world. And I think that's an authentically human thing, unless you're a sociopath, which is what 1 in 25 people apparently is some level of
Too many
sociopathy. But
apparently, but yeah, yeah, right. No,
most
it's
people
a good
see
feeling.
value in helping people get through life and benefit. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, here in a minute, I'm going to read you my two final questions. I'll give them to you in advance as I do with all my guests. And one of them will be a little tricky since you're not actually an attorney, but I'm going to give you the powers of an attorney. So question number one is, if we go back in time, we meet young David, fresh out of medical school, maybe. What advice would you give yourself, and why, other than the obvious, buy a lot of Bitcoin, hold it till it hits, 100K or whatever. And then question number two
Right.
is, if I gave you my pencil, and with this pencil you're able to change a law that's on the books, edit a law, add a new law, erase a law, whatever it is, what law would you change and why? While you percolate on that, we're going to jump over and take another look at your website. As a reminder, I am talking with Dr. David Grundy, who runs Grundy MD Consulting. That is GrundyMDConsulting.com is his website, and his phone number, which I now have in front of me bigger, is 650-649-5352. And if you are an injury attorney out there and you need a consulting physician, and hopefully after this conversation, you have an understanding of why you might want a consulting physician, he is definitely a wonderful resource. Again, a true generalist who understands a little bit of everything in the aspect. He can tie everything together and get back to you in a quick turnaround time. That I think David seems he's got a wonderful head on his shoulders and will be a great asset to you. So again, we'll have a link down below in the description as well as his phone number. That's Grundy MD Consulting.com, GrundyMDConsulting.com. Our final sponsor of the day is Rank with News. If there was a guaranteed way to get your law firm or your business featured in major national publications like Yahoo News, Bloomberg, Reuters, Forbes, and others, and see those articles ranking locally, sometimes nationally, sometimes in as little as 8 hours for major competitive keywords that people were actually looking for and made people want to work with you more because you're in the news, what else would you need to know? Rank with News is simply the most powerful way to hit page one in under 2 weeks safely, organically, and quite often permanently. This is like guaranteed SEO or search engine optimization on steroids, ranking quickly and sticking long term. If you're tired of poor visibility for your business or firm, visit rankwith.news to learn more and book a time to speak with a specialist about featuring your firm or business in major national 8-figure traffic sites that can help launch you to page one of Google in a matter of hours and help you dominate your local local marketplace. Get exposure, rank higher in Google, build credibility, and win more customers and clients with Rank with News. Rank with News. There we go. All righty. Well, David, we have just magically traveled through time. And without breaking the space-time continuum, don't step on a butterfly or anything, but you're able to go over and you're able to give him just, a couple of sentences worth of advice. What advice would you give yourself and why?
Hey, that's a great question. You were talking about buy a lot of Bitcoin. I've always been a Mac user. I know I love Macs. They work, yeah, and so like years and years and years ago. I mean, I mowed a lot of lawns and all this type of thing to buy like the first Mac. The beige toaster. So I said,
With a
listen,
green screen?
don't buy that stupid computer. Instead, buy Apple stock with it. It's got to be worth tens of millions now. But
Like
no,
you can't play Oregon Trail on Apple stock. I'm just saying.
well, yeah, there you go. There you go. But joking aside, I would have given the young me advice that I did take, but I would have said be more intense about it, which is just uh, how's the word? Keep upskilling always, and always look for the opportunity, not the obstacle. You
That's
know,
a good way to.
you think you're blocked in certain ways, you think you're suffering in life, you think you are, right? There's always a different perspective. There's always an opportunity along with the obstacle. So I would say just, focus on the opportunity, not the obstacle as much as possible.
One of my favorite authors is G.K. Chesterton, who says something similar to that. He says,
Sure, I like GK
and
Chesterton. Yeah.
adventure is just an inconvenience rightly considered, and an inconvenience is just an adventure wrongly considered. I've always
That's a pretty good one. Wasn't
lived by
that
that
one
advice.
of C.S. Lewis's either friends or mentors? I know there was some
I
crossover
think
there.
he was Inklings. He was English, and he was writing a little before the time of the Inklings, if I recall.
Okay.
But Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, would have been
Tolkien.
obviously
Right.
the author of the Lord of the Rings. In fact, and my longtime listeners know I'm Christian, I'm Catholic, and I do a lot of literature reading and philosophy. You know that I do the philosophy stuff as well. One of my favorite lines. C.S. Lewis was an atheist, and it was J.R.R. Tolkien who actually brought him around to Christianity. And then later on, they would both go and write their famous works of fiction. For Lewis, it's the Narnia stories, and for Tolkien, it's the Lord of the Rings. But when Lewis was writing the Narnia stories, he would bring them to Tolkien to read, and Tolkien didn't like analogy at all. He didn't. He thought it was just ugly and what's the word? It's too bald-faced and whatnot. Although Lewis is writing stories for kids, so he's being a little on
Right.
the nose. But he says to Louis, he says, "Why do you keep dressing Jesus up like a lion?" Which I just hope.
Yeah. It's a pretty broad allegory. But yeah, exactly.
I've read them to my kids, and I think they're wonderful stories. But that interaction always sticks out in my head when I think about Lewis and Tolkien. So anyway, sorry, I could wax nonsense about that stuff all day.
Another
Um,
time. We must.
absolutely, absolutely, over a beer or something.
There it is.
So other question. This is my magic pencil. I usually have a magic pen, and I cleaned out. Oh, you know what? Actually, hang on. Da, 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 da. Here's the magic pen. And this one gets a free shout out to an order of Benedictine monks in Atchison, Kansas, St. Benedict's Abbey. That's kansasmonks.org. So I found this pen one day, and one of the priests must have blessed this pen because this is a miraculous pen. With this pen, you can strike a law from the books, you can edit a law that's on the books, or you can add a new law to the books. I usually let my attorney guests have this pen, but if I were to loan you my pen, David, what would you do with it?
Well, I'm still a good Army officer at heart, and it's like we don't make law, we just adapt to it, and then we try to be creative within the ambit of what the law demands. That said, I think it'll be pretty obvious that, along with probably most of your clients, I think that some of the caps on damages, particularly in med mal cases in certain states, just aren't appropriate. I mean, somebody with loses a limb from negligence, and it's you can only get this pittance. I think that that's a real shame and should be amended. Now, I get the big picture view. Perhaps the system's groaning under the weight of too much litigation, but this is too crude an instrument, right? And I think that a lot of those specific laws should be amended, modified, stricken, that kind of thing. So that would probably be my big one.
Took off both of my legs and I'm not able to work anymore. Here's $5,000. You'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm a dual citizen in New Zealand, and they have this thing called ACC, which basically it's a public fund to make you whole for med mal. There is no med mal over there, but they really do have a playbook. They're like, oh, you lost your hand. Which hand was it? Left hand, that's worth 47,000 bucks. Right hand, 112. Or it's like, and you're right. A young, yeah, a young productive craftsman, or it's not enough. Obviously, it's not even close to enough in many cases.
Well, David, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me and my listeners. I do always like to let my guest have the final word. Are there any last words of wisdom or parting advice or last thoughts, anything you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Oh man, if you can find any wisdom in here, you're welcome to it, Justin. I just want to say thanks for having me on here. I'm glad we connected. That was like actually looking right at your listeners. That was one of Justin's marketing efforts, like went awry, and arrow intended for someone else hit me. But it's been great knowing you and working with you, and thanks for what you do. I really appreciate you.
I appreciate that as well. Thank you very much for being on the show. This has been the Attorney Post. As always, if you, well, I'll start this and say this. I've been chatting with Dr. David Grundy, who is not himself an attorney, but does work with lots of attorneys. As always, though this podcast does deal with lots of legal issues, this podcast should not be construed as legal advice. And if you have a legal area or a legal issue, you should always seek competent advice from an attorney in an area who deals with the matter that you have an issue with. Obviously, if you are an attorney and you need a consultative physician, I think David would be a wonderful resource. And again, we'll have all of his links down below in the description as well. This is, again, the Attorney Post. I am your host, Justin West. If you're listening on YouTube, we do love a like, subscribe, and a share. Feel free to leave a comment down below as well. Let us know how you found the video and let us know what insights you got out of the video as well. And of course, if you're on any other podcast repositories, Stitcher, Apple, Spotify, whatever there's another one I'm totally blanking on right now, but all the main podcast repositories where feel free to rate us, like us, etc. Most important thing you can do is if you know somebody who would benefit from the knowledge in our video, please share it with them to help them. In this case, be obviously helping an attorney get the knowledge they need to help their clients, because at the end of the day, all clients need help, and if they don't know their rights, they don't have any. And this is part of that process of helping people know their rights and get the best amount of justice they can. Until next time, I'm Justin West. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.